Okay, welcome to our PhD student lightning talks. I'm Evan Dadson. I'm a second year PhD student in geospatial analytics here at the Center for Geospatial Analytics. I'm advised by Chris Jones, and I'm in the Biological Invasions Lab. So today I'm going to be presenting on my work, forecasting and management of a multi-generational insect pest in complex agroecosystems. We're good? Okay. Actually good. Okay, so as a little bit of background, it's estimated that we're going to need at least 50% more food to feed a growing population by the year 2050. So this comes with a variety of challenges. It's estimated that we lose about 40% of our crops each year, and an estimated $220 billion to pests and diseases. So of this $220 billion, around 70 billion of those dollars are directly attributed to pest. There's also other issues that we have to account for in these ecosystems, such as eutrophication from agricultural runoff, as well as soil degradation from extensive tilling and drought. So how do we account for treating these pests? Well, we use a variety of tools such as insecticides and genetically modified crops. So globally, genetically modified crops have saved farmers a huge amount of money while allowing them to not rely on these traditional pesticides. So globally, the amount of pesticides that have been purchased and applied to crops have decreased. The cost of these traditional pesticides have also decreased, and it's also increased farmer profits as well as total crop yields. However, this has increased the challenges faced with pesticides and genetically modified crops and plants. So as we increase the amount of genetically modified crops that are used in the ecosystem, we also increase the amount of pests that are resistant to these. So these pests have been increasing almost exponentially. And we could see from the global distribution of genetically modified crops and resistance that it's really concentrated in North America. And in addition to these challenges, we have that resistance is increasing. And we're also getting cross resistance from corn to cotton, from cotton to corn, and other genetically modified crops as they come up in production. So how do we combat the need for applying pesticides to minimize the environmental impacts, to minimize the negative impacts, while also increasing the amount of food that we need by 2050? And yeah, so decreasing these impacts, well, we need to monitor for pests in the environment. So we do this using regional extension networks, where people who are trained in entomology and pesticide use go out into the field, and then they just basically count how many insects are present in the field, specifically damaging insects. And then they rely on these traditional tools that incorporate temperature and precipitation to get basically a static map of risk across the landscape. So this now brings us to a more focal issue. So as temperatures increase due to climate change, we're facing a more pressing need for pests especially as they move northward throughout the year. So here we have a corn earworm. It's eating the top of this corn, and this is no longer going to be able to be sold in the fresh market that you would buy in the grocery store. Here we have a little more background. So as you could see, we have a worm, then we have an adult moth. So it's going through these life stages as it develops. But what's been concerning is that due to increasing warming temperatures, you have an increased amount of area where these larvae can survive over the winter, and thus they can move further north. So we have the ability to survive over the winter. We have variation in this yellow where it may or may not survive. And then we have this vulnerable landscape here in the north where they're migrating to each year. And as you can see over time, that northern region is shrinking, and then that blue region is growing, and then that yellow region is just becoming more sporadic and less predictable. So how do we model these populations? Well, they're collected across the landscape, and then they come through tools like these where regional extension networks partner with farmers and other people to put this into like a dashboard and make it available to the public, especially farmers who are really concerned about these damaging insects in their crops. So what are the goals and questions that I want to answer with this research? Number one, so when do these pests become persistent in southern cropping regions? And then can we predict the time that it'll take from when they become persistent in these southern cropping regions to when they invade northern cropping regions that are very susceptible to minimize that resistance? Next, how well can we forecast these pests through the cropping season to give growers and farmers a dynamic tool where they can manage these invasions as they occur? And then three, can we improve these forecasts? Can we get more near real time, and can we incorporate different data sources to improve them? So just in summary, to answer question one, we have a variable region in the blue, and we want to understand how they're traveling north, because we already know that this northern region is shrinking, but is there some signal that we could pick up in the landscape to really say, okay, we see them peak around this week, and then they're invading the next week in the north. But is it shrinking over time? Is it persistent, or is it always stable? The next question is, can we get a really dynamic forecast of risk to understand vulnerable areas? And then like, what can farmers do to be able to manage using these tools? So expected results is that we have this dynamic forecast of risk throughout the environment that people can go to understand, are we vulnerable to insect pests? But then what do you have? So right now we have weekly data, but we really want to understand what's happening in between so we can understand those drivers, especially as they evolve over daily timescales, maybe hourly timescales, and like what is left over. So this would be question three. So I have a question for the audience. Can anyone tell me what this is? Rain. Okay, we have one answer. No, it is not rain. This was actually a few, maybe like a month ago or something. This is spotted lanternfly. It's an invasive insect that entered into the US, and it was actually caught on radar over DC a few weeks ago. And I don't have any images, but it was just everywhere across the landscape. So radar is a rich tool that we could really exploit for insect forecasts, because they're mainly controlled by a lot of these atmospheric effects. So this could really get us down to like a daily time step or like a sub-weekly time step, and maybe improve forecasts like it's been done for other literature. And so the future aims, so once we have like a more dynamic forecast throughout the week, are we really meeting the needs of the growers and the stakeholders who are involved? And how can we really make this more practical for them? So farmers, if you can imagine, they could really only control what's local to them, but they can't control these other factors or ecosystems like to the south, for example. So are we really meeting their needs, and how can we improve these tools? And then also, can we transfer these? So corn earworm is related to two sister species that are likely to invade the US within the next couple of years. So can we transfer this model to have like accurate predictions when they enter the US, and then a dynamic risk model for those as well? So with that, I'll take questions. Thank you.
All right, any questions for Evan? Also, if you're in the Zoom chat, we have assuming monitoring, so type in the chat, and assuming we'll read out your question for Evan or any of our future speakers.
What are the farmers doing with this information specifically? Like, do you have examples?
None in here. So they want to understand the populations on their farm so they can apply pesticides
Okay.
at an appropriate rate. It's normally called like an economic threshold for corn earworm. So like once you've met the threshold, then you want to be applying pesticides and treatments at a certain level. Yeah. And then
So you mentioned in question 3, there are question marks in between different weeks. So those weekly data are coming from a monitoring system, and you are trying to predict like the daily sort of patterns using the weekly data. Am I understanding correctly? So my question is that like, how do you know whether your model is performing well? Because what's the ground truth? Like, say, yeah.
Yeah, so at the current level of what I'm doing, I'm using just those weekly aggregate data. And then for future aims, I would love to see connecting it, you're right, at the like sub-weekly level. So like how can we improve these? From the literature, from what I've seen based on like birdcast, if you've seen birdcast using these, it's really kind of hand wavy. So it need to be validated at the weekly scale. But I'd love to like get into modeling at like that daily scale just to see at the weekly time step, can we validate and improve this a little better?
Thank you. If I'm a farmer and I know this is coming, like what am I doing to prevent or mitigate or lessen the damage? And so what does knowing this a week ahead of time or 3 days ahead of time or even a year ahead of time, how does that kind of change my farming or pesticide use?
Yeah, so it like as a farmer, you're probably going to be going to your regional extension for this kind of advice. They've been exploring things such as refuge crops that are not GMO. So you have more of a landscape where they could go to and they're not building resistance. So as a farmer, if you're incentivized to plant like weed host or refuge or in your interannual cycle of what you're planting and growing, you could maybe make some changes to there and then maybe apply like less pesticides at like a 3-day warning. You're not going to be able to do much, but like say we have a really good 3-week forecast and you see that you're maybe not as much at risk, you may be incentivized to not apply that second spray that you may want to apply.
Maybe one more question.
That spotted lanternfly data collected.
Oh, that was just on weather radar from AccuWeather. So for X-band vertical looking radar, a bunch of meteorologists got together and they said, well, it's not rain, it's a perfectly sunny day. So we can only determine that it's insects in the environment. And they determine like at which band of the atmosphere there would be like typically birds and then insects. And so it was just that within that band.
I mean, was it interpolated or?
Oh, most likely, yeah. I'm not really quite sure, but just wanted to do like a snippet of something recent.
Awesome. Thank you, Evan. Next up, I think we have Titalayo.
Hello, everyone. My name is Titilayo, and I'm a third-year PhD student at the center, and my advisors are Dr. Martin and Dr. Adon. And the title of my project of today's presentation is Mapping Forest Retreat Using CNNs and satellite sensors. And a little background into this. So this research focused on coastal forest ecosystem, and coastal forest ecosystem are highly vulnerable to sea level rise because they are very close to the coast, and also inundation just because of flooding from this coast, and then climate change, increasing temperature, And some previous research has shown that this area are like the forests are either transitioning to ghost forests or marshes. Just a recent study shows that about 8 to 9% of forests transition to either marsh or ghost forest between 1985 and 2019 in the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. And just just visually to see what that means, just at the front you could see marshes, and just between the forest and this marsh you could see like standing dead trees that represent ghost forest. So ghost forests are dying trees and or standing dead trees, depending on the state they are at this, like transitioning to a different ecosystem. And they are not self-sustaining. So because they are dying, they cannot maintain ecological feedback. So that means they can either transition to marsh at some point, or if there is like some kind of conservation, we could maybe restore them back to the initial forest that they used to be. Just for you to see more clearly what that means. So some of these ghost forests are just standing dead trees. And over time, you could see invasion of shrub or like small, tiny little trees that are like invasive, or maybe they are more resilient to salinity, inundation. And one of the factors that contribute to this, or maybe exacerbate the impact of sea level rise, is also that this area that we are studying also have like artificial drainage system, which allow influx of salinity, like salinity coming into freshwater ecosystem. And for some of these plants that cannot like withstand this salinity level, they end up either dying or transitioning to marsh eventually. So we are interested in understanding how this ecosystem is transitioning. If we know how, we know the rate at which it's transitioning, where it is transitioning to, maybe we could maybe conserve that area, or maybe make informed decision about managing this ecosystem. And one of the difficulty of doing this is that within the forest ecosystem itself, there is a high variation, because we have like different forest species and their level of greenness is very different, leading to high intraclass variance. And if you are comparing these forests to maybe to a marsh or maybe to ghost forest, they also look similar. So it is very hard to differentiate between that. So this is one of the limitations of using traditional classifier to classify between forest or marsh or ghost forest. So what if we have phenological data set? That is, phenology is showing like the trend, like sometimes you have like, let's say early January, we have leaf off, and with time we have leaf on. And we could see that given that ghost forest does not have leaf, so they shouldn't be leaf off at some point. So if we could use some of this information, maybe we'll be able to distinguish between forest, ghost forest, and subsequently map how forest is transitioning to different classes over time. So just giving you a background of what the study site look like, you could see that it is very close to the coast, like the sea, and it's also like low elevation. As you can see, all of these places, they are around below 10-meter elevation. And given this, it also increases susceptibility of this area to sea level rise. So the objective is this, to see how, let's say, satellite imagery, specifically Landsat and Sentinel-2, could help us to see this, like map this ecosystem better, because we know Sentinel-2 has a higher resolution compared to Landsat. And then to see like the rate at which it is changing over time. So we have different bands, like different metrics, like phenology, winter, summer indices, and then we have 6 land cover type, that is forest, marsh, water, cultivated land map. And then we use convolutional neural network, because this does not consider just pixel level. It's looking at like a patch, which gives us like areas that are more closer to each other are more likely to be similar compared to the areas that are very much far apart. And then we evaluated it and then do some kind of bitemporal like differences, like area that used to be forest in 1985, for instance, what are they in 2021? And then looking at our phenology, we could see that the marsh has a low NDVI. NDVI in this sense represent vegetation indices that is showing how green a surface is. So we could see that marshes has lower NDVI and forest has high NDVI. So we have 3 times, like we have 2020, 2021, 2022. This because satellite imagery, we have like cloud cover over time. So using just a single image, like a year annual image, just using that, we'll not be able to cover for all of our temporal, like phenological change because of mixing pixel or because of snow cover, cloud cover. So we kind of like use 3-year stacking to see how this looks like. And then because we're also looking at Landsat, because Landsat go way back compared to Sentinel-2. And this is just looking at the result because we are much more concerned about ghost forest. Previous study has always, like there has been previous studies that estimated every other class, but for the ghost forest class, because they are like small patches, so it is not like easy to identify them from Landsat imagery. So, and then we have limited training data sets. So we were looking at what if we use Sentinel-2? It's like 10-meter resolution. Maybe we could see a lot more better. And as you can see, we have like our Sentinel-2 model produce a much more higher accuracy compared to our Landsat imagery, which is, yeah, it looks promising. And then we're also looking at our initial hypothesis is that phenology would be contributing more to separating between these, like differentiating different land cover type. And as you can see, we could see that phenology contributes to both Landsat and Sentinel-2 imagery, contributed to the accuracy, indicating that phenology is promising in differentiating, especially ghost forest from every other class. And then this is just showing like what the area used to be in 1985 and what it is in 2021. And as you can see, over 21% of the forest either transition to either marsh, shrub, ghost forest, or water. And that is indicating a very huge loss. And we also noticed that between 1985 to 2010, we have like 1.4 times increase in forest loss between like from 2010 to 2021. So we lose more forest between 2010 to 2021. And we also compare this to existing product already, that is the national land cover. And as you can see, we have different, like the same pattern in our forest loss. So we could see that the loss is majorly around the area that is very close to the coast, though our own estimate of forest loss is a lot more higher than the NLCD data set. And for the next step, we are looking at how all of this trend, like the climate, the sea level rise. For instance, our sea level rise shows that for the study site, like for the coastal North Carolina, an average of 5 millimeter increase in sea level per year, which is a lot. So we are trying to look at how individual climate parameters contribute to this loss that we are experiencing. And the rate at which our system is changing. So let's say this used to be a forest in 1985, and by 2021, we could see emerging patches of marsh or maybe ghost forest. So we want to see the rate at which that area will be expanding over time. So what if this expands to something like this and something bigger? Or maybe this used to be the boundary of forest in 1985, and the boundary reduced slightly to this in 2021. So we want to see the rate at which it's changing. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Delia. Any questions?
Did you incorporate data? I may have just missed it. Did you incorporate data on salinity, or was that approximated with sea level rise? And do you think that would make a big difference to mapping ghost forests?
Oh, so for the classification, I didn't use salinity because we don't have so much monitoring station along the side. But for the drivers, because there is also a part of this that I look at how different drivers contributed to those change. Salinity was part of the drivers that we used to look at that change.
Nice presentation. I really liked all your figures. I'm wondering what the definition of a ghost forest is. So it's when the trees have been dying from like the salinity influx. So if you have like I saw on the graph, like the NDVI is different. So if you're like out in the field and you see like 1 or 2 dead trees, would that still be considered a ghost forest? Like how many dead trees are considered?
Okay, I am not sure I can say this is like maybe the total number of trees that will give us what a ghost forest is. But ghost forest typically could be from salinity, it could also be from pests, like provided we have like maybe a large expanse of land that we have like so many standing dead trees or dying trees. So it's not compulsory it's from salinity, it could be from different other causes, but at least you could see patches of large expanse of land, standing dead trees as a result of different factors. But in the course, the factor contributing to this majorly is salinity, sea level rise, and inundation. Yeah, I'm not sure I know the area that described that.
Is it? Good job.
Thank you.
Is it part of it that it's not expected to grow back? Because I was thinking about like Torres del Paine where they had this huge fires and there were a lot of standing dead trees. But I think that may recover eventually.
So there's another part of my research that is looking at forest resilience. So while some areas are like losing forest, there are also some areas that are recovering from past like disturbance. But in most cases, some of those areas that are recovering are like abrupt change, like this change from maybe like wildfire, but a change that is gradual. The chances of like restoring back is a little bit slightly different because it's like a factor that is contributing. It's not like a sudden change that led to that like loss of that land. Yeah, forest land. Yeah.
Any questions in the chat? Assuming.
Oh, no.
I think there's a question.
Yeah, just really nice overview of your work. So you talked about different metrics or different types of forest change. Are you also looking at like which, you kind of spoke a little bit to it recently, which these forests are more resilient and maybe why?
Yes. So there's a part of my study research also that is looking at like how manage forests, like because we have so many planted forests along this area. So we are looking at like how planted forests responds to this disturbance compared to like a natural, like matured forest. So we are like trying to look at that, or maybe some areas that are like more closer to maybe coast compared to areas that are like a little bit far away, or maybe like upland forests, are they like more resilient compared to forested wetlands? So yes, there is a part of my research that is looking at that.
Sorry, good presentation. When you showed the performance of the model across the different classification categories, it seemed like the ghost forest accuracy or F1, I can't remember which one you used, but that one is like way lower than other categories, right? And your model seemed like a significantly increased that performance by, I don't know, 14% margin, something like that. So I'm just curious about that process of like how to take this convolutional neural network model and then fine tune the model. And how did that process go? Like maybe like what's the size of the training data set and what kind of metrics you used along the way to optimize the performance that you have?
Okay, so for individual patches that was used to train this model, it's like a 90-meter, like for the Lancer, for instance, we have like 30 meter by 30 meter. So we took like 7 by 7 pixel size, which is relatively small, but given our study site is also a small area. So I think we're able to use that. But we don't have enough training data set for ghost forests because they appear in very small patches. So it could be just like a single Landsat pixel that represents a ghost forest patch. So just for an area that at least we have like large expanse of ghost forest, we use that for training data set. So it has like lesser representation. So for our sampling, within the sampling data set, it has like a lower representation. But because the Sentinel-2 is 30-meter resolution. That is, give us more opportunity to enlarge our training data set. So aside from the resolution, the other thing that made the Sentinel-2 to have like a much more higher accuracy is because we have a much training data set, just because it's like lower, like 30 meters, so 10 meters, so we can take more, like times 3 training data sets, since it's like 10 meters compared to NASA that's 30. Yes.
Thank you to Delia. Bear with me, we're changing modalities here. And our, give her Emma, presentation number 3.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emma Vale. I'm a PhD student in the Geospatial Analysis for Environmental Change Lab here in the Center for Geospatial Analytics. And today I'll be talking about the disagreement in flood extent estimates across different sites and different satellite observations. So I want to start by kicking us off with our motivation. Why do we care about flooding? People who work with flooding know that it's going to become more intense over time and more frequent due to climate change. And we really need to be able to get accurate maps to people on the ground so they know which assets are exposed and where the damage is really at. Otherwise, efforts are being divided into places that they're not exactly needed. And traditional methods such as like gauges and like field work is not only dangerous, but also not accessible everywhere. A lot of times there are errors or just missing data where we need it, and it does not capture where the peak flood is at all times, or even most of the time. So we've become more reliant on satellite data and drone data because we're able to safely get imagery. And because of that, one of the key questions that we have to answer is, are these maps trustworthy, and how reliable are they between different sensors and observations? So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of background, since I'm not sure about your remote sensing experience. But basically, satellites record per pixel electromagnetic measurements. So there's optical radiance and there's SAR backscatter, which is synthetic aperture radar. And those are the two main types of satellites that we work with. These measurements are then transformed into feature vectors, which would be like your spectral and backscatter features, and then your terrain metrics as well. And then I just also want to tell you that a supervised classifier, like a random forest map, is just how I'm going to get my flooded versus non-flooding maps for the spatially explicit modeling. So existing literature points to already known sensor trade-offs, and what you're going to see on the left is optical imagery, that's Sentinel-2, and it's in false color right now, so it includes the shortwave infrared band, and that's why we're able to clearly see flooding as this lighter blue color. So it already has this spectrally rich information that's in most optical sensors that really helps us highlight where flood is actually at. But as you can see from this example, one of the very well-known limitations is clouds. So if there are clouds, it's going to be hard to see the flood underneath. And then to the right is going to be Sentinel-1 synthetic aperture radar. And as you can see, the clouds do not appear on there, but because it's backscatter, it's a little bit more ambiguous and harder to work with because it relies on moisture and geometry and angle rather than these spectrally rich bands that we can make indices out of. So my 3 research questions are basically how do different satellite sensors perform for those pixel level flood detection across different events and landscapes? What is the value of adding terrain metrics like slope, elevation, hillshade, other features of that nature? And then where are the errors of commission and emission? Where are we seeing the errors? Is it random or are there patterns to it? So these are my overall study areas. I have 3 in California. I have a northern, southern, and coastal area of interest. And then I have a Poland area of interest that's divided into both an expanded AOI and a subset AOI. That way I can focus on different features, since the expanded area of interest has more agricultural and river flooding, whereas the subset AOI is more focused on urban flooding, so I can compare different landscapes in that way. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to focus on Poland specifically, so I think it has the best case of flood. I also just want to introduce you to my modeling pipeline. If you've worked with random forest before, you are already familiar with this. But basically, I just manually went through and labeled a bunch of polygons. In this case, it was 800 polygons for a total of like 14,000 points that were then divided into training and validation data sets. The points were gotten by sampling points per polygon with a fixed number. I think it was like 64 points per polygon. I then built feature stacks, so indices for obstacle sensors. You can get like NVI. And then for the SAR sensors, the part of the feature stack is definitely the terrain, because in SAR sensors, you're going to see that that's pretty much vital to making sure that you're not getting noise everywhere. And then, of course, training the random forest models and producing that binary flood map based on the output spatially explicit model. So these are my random forest results for the Poland site. They look very similar, as you can see, but you will notice that there's a little bit more noise in the PlanetScope and the Sentinel-1. So PlanetScope is an optical sensor, and it is at a higher spatial resolution than Sentinel-2. Sentinel-2 is at 10 meters, and PlanetScope is at 3. So you would expect PlanetScope to have less noise in it with the same amount of training data. I'm pretty sure what is happening here is because it is so fine resolution, it is picking up distinct features in those polygons, and it's able to pull out more noise because it's so high resolution. So going back through and refining training data for that is definitely an important next step. For Sentinel-1, there's a little bit more noise in Sentinel-2, which is to be expected. That definitely lines up with existing literature for random forest classifications, just because of it is more ambiguous and harder to get the noise out, even when using terrain metrics and features. So I wanted to measure terrain inclusion. That was one of my research questions. To focus specifically, I want you to notice that in every single one of these outputs, slope and elevation improved SAR. Specifically slope, this kind of tells us that you don't actually need elevation, because in almost every instance, slope is going to outperform it in terms of increasing the F1 in these outputs. And this is measuring F1 flood, so it's not looking at overall accuracy. That just means it's including recall and precision, so that if there is more noise being detected or it's under detecting water, then it's going to lower either way. So this is a better metric than overall accuracy for actually detecting flood. But yeah, the main point of this slide is to emphasize that terrain is definitely needed for all kinds of SAR, and slope is more important than elevation and regular no terrain features. I also wanted to compare to existing products. So DSWX and SWOT, which is surface water and ocean topography, and surface water extent. I wanted to compare that to PlanetScope, which was one of the better performing binary outputs. And as you can see, in these existing products that people are actively using for flood detection, there is an incredible level of noise in both of them. And what's interesting for SWOT is that it both over detects water and noise features around river, but it also under detects actual river flooding. So it has both problems. The SWX does a little bit better at detecting the actual flood, then of course over detects water everywhere else in the region. And then the PlanetScope is how it compares. So this is basically just showing you that while we do have existing products available, it is still important to get individually tested trial maps for a specific location that we can say, okay, this is much more accurate than the generalized algorithm that is outputting maps that's already available. So where and how sensors fail answers that third research question of errors are spatially structured. They're not random. You will notice that Sentinel-2 misses flood under clouds and shadows and in very dark surfaces. Sentinel-1 underdetects narrow urban and under canopy flooding. And this is super evident in every single SAR output that you're going to see is, especially in urban areas, even with like delta coherence and other processing, it's very difficult for SAR to distinguish between those urban settings and those actual flood. And in most cases, it won't detect it at all. So it'll just decide, okay, well, we're just not going to include this as water. So either over detects or under detects, but almost never is it perfect. That you're going to see a little bit easier with optical imagery. And then adding terrain suppresses those impossible water and ridges, those steep slopes, but it does not remove all ambiguities. As we saw in the Sentinel-1, there's still a lot of noise. So even though we added slope and it did improve the F1, it's not going to make it perfect. It just makes it a lot better. So implications for operations and next steps. Basically, this finds that it's conditional, that if you have a study area, you are going to choose the sensor that is right for your study area. For example, in the Northern California AOI, it's probably going to be better to choose a SAR sensor because of the amount of cloud coverage. So if there's more clouds or it's nighttime, then you'll choose SAR. Or if it's more of an urban area like the subset pole in AOI, it's going to be better to choose like optical imagery. So the next steps for my research specifically is to, now that I kind of know how to weight these different sensors based on the accuracy baselines that I've established, I'm going to try I'm trying to get uncertainty mapping. So that's like the main goal of this, is to get that uncertainty mapping to better communicate risks to stakeholders. And so having these baselines and being able to weight them better, I can put them into a multi-sensor fusion model and hopefully produce the ideal complementary map that everybody aims to get with these different sensors. Now I will open it up for questions.
You use a different random forest model for Sentinel-2 and PlanetScope?
Yeah, so they were all individually trained. They were all completely different scripts, completely different models. They weren't trained on the same model. They'll have their own training, have their own model.
Do you use any other classification method, or are you planning to use any others than random forest?
I've only used random forest for classification so far, just because I think it is the standard for these types of baseline establishments. I am open to trying other classifications as well, but so far, random forest has been the one that I've seen most in literature, and I think the one that's most supported. But I guess it would be cool to be able to compare like a random forest classification to any other type and say, okay, well, how can we use like these two accuracy metrics together to better inform weight for a multi-sensor fusion model?
Just curious, have you thought about implementing this model in North Carolina as well, in the Western North Carolina and Eastern like coast area?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that I chose Poland and California is not because I have specific interest in those places, but because for a fusion model like this, I need the most amount of data that I can get. And these were the floods that were captured by the most amount of sensors. So Poland was captured by 4 sensors, and the subset AOI had Capella, which is very unique to be able to get because it's one that has to be operationally sent out. And then for California, it was so nice that it was captured by SWAT and also Atlas Pulsar 2, which is like L-band SAR. So right now, these study areas were definitely influenced by the data availability. I would love to do it in North Carolina just because I feel like it would bring that local aspect. It would just need to have floods that are captured by a bunch of sensors. That way I can justify including it.
You said you trained each model for each sensor, for each satellite, but did you also do it for each study area or across all study areas within the same?
For each study area as well. I have an insane amount of separate scripts labeled each study area, each sensor, and then validation and training separated for all of them. So it is all separate. That way there's no bias introduced.
Like not directly related to your research, but when you run a little machine learning model like that, like what's the best method to take a note about each result and like not messing up or like losing it?
I'm maybe not the best person to tell you because I have messed up and had to go back and be like, okay, I have to redocument all of these metrics because I need to make sure. It's like whenever you type in your password and then you mess a character and you delete the whole thing. I've had to do that a couple times already. For me, keeping the scripts separate is definitely helpful because then if I want to see that confusion matrix, I can just run it and then that's the one associated exactly with that. But I have a PDF. That's the way I do it. Is I have this Google Doc that I eventually print into a PDF that I document every single, like there's a bunch of tables in there with those different sensors and everything separated. It's nice, neat little columns.